to Syrian Democratic Forces on the ground. Foreign jihadi families have escaped from a camp in the city of Raqqa this past Sunday. France 24's James Andre has travelled numerous times to Syria and has visited the camp of Ain Issa. Thank you very much for joining us here on the set. Now, the French foreign minister, who is in Baghdad today, says the people who've escaped from this camp this past Sunday aren't such a big threat. Is he just playing down fears?
Well, no, to be honest, he is right in a sense. I visited Ain Issa twice, actually. I visited once in June 2017 with my colleague Maïsa Awad from the Arabic desk, and then I went back on November of the same year with Abdallah Belkawi. And this is the camp. It is a refugee camp, and part of this camp, when you enter, to the left, there's like this little house that you can see here, in which are housed families of foreign fighters, foreign jihadists who are in Syria. Now, these women, for most of them, are probably not the most dangerous. I'll explain to you why later on. But first, I'd like us to listen to what they had to say. This was back in November 2017. Obviously, the situation back then was different. It was when the Islamic State group was losing a lot of land, but it wasn't to the extent of the end of the battle in Bahrouz. And these are these women who had fled the caliphate, but could still at that stage have potentially stayed inside. This is what they had to say.
I've been trying to leave for 2 years. Thank God I found someone to help me. When I came to Syria, I knew nothing about Daesh. I came with my husband. I'd lived in Spain for 5 years. Then we returned to Morocco for a year, and my husband told me he wanted to go back to Turkey for work. But when we got to Turkey, he said he was actually going to Syria and that there was no job in Turkey. I said, how can we go to Syria when the country is at war? There are planes bombing. He told me I could either follow him or go back to Morocco. I said, okay, I'll go home, but I'm taking the kids with me. He replied, no, you leave them with me. I'm taking the kids to Syria. How do you think you're going to take care of the kids in Syria without their mother, I told him. But he said he'd marry another woman who would raise them. They're my children. I couldn't leave them to another mother, so I crossed into Syria. I had no choice. But I'm going home. No matter what happens, I'm returning to Morocco. He said, when I die, return to Morocco. Well, he's dead.
Today, what we want is to go to Canada, Japan, Germany or Holland, but not Turkestan, not China. We don't want to return to China. There's a lot of injustice there, even against children. You can look it up on the internet. All governments know about the discrimination there. Countries like Holland, Japan, Germany or Canada, they can help us.
Yeah, so you see these two women. The first one basically says that she came with her husband and had no choice. The second one is from the Uyghur community. It is a Chinese woman, and obviously she came now with her husband to open a Chinese restaurant, and she explained to us off camera that her husband was asked to fight, refused, and got killed by the Islamic State group. But these people, I would say, were probably not the most radicalized of what the Kurdish were facing. And indeed, the atmosphere there, I mean, there is a presence of the SAIS, the information, the intelligence of the Kurdish intelligence in the camp, but they let you walk around pretty freely, which is very different to what we saw here. And this is Al-Hol camp, where we filmed later on, and that was beginning of this year, 2019.
Now, just talking about the Al-Hol camp, you visited there. Now, if people escaped from there, we'd be in a very different situation, wouldn't we?
Yeah, indeed, if you take a map of where these camps are placed, now let me show you on this map. There we are. We have Ain Issa. Ain Issa is here. Ain Issa was the very first place where the Kurds took in civilians fleeing the fighting, because Raqqa is right here, just south from Ain Issa camp. So that was if you like, the natural movement was up north at that moment. Then they opened other camps, which already existed. Actually, Al-Hol was already a refugee camp, and Roj also. But these two camps started housing the people fleeing the last phases of battle. And what we have here, of course, as you can see, geographically, they're much more to the east here, and much more inside Kurdish territory. And they're very close to the Iraqi border as well. So if you want to take some of these people out, it's much easier. So yes, the more battle-hardened, more radicalized women and families are here. And of course, there are other detention centers where the men, the fighters, are kept, and that is where the maximum risk is, of course. Now, we have heard reports that the Americans, for example, have taken their high-value targets out. For example, the French are probably working at the same thing, and this is what Jean-Yves Le Drian was probably brokering in Iraq today. We know he's trying to negotiate for there to be some sort of judicial cooperation with Iraq. But indeed, it's a different public here, and I can tell you that when we visited that camp and we filmed these women inside our whole camp, it was much more tense. So yes, a few French people have fled, according to some reports, from Ain Issa. 800 people in all. 2/3 of the people being kept in that camp, I mean, foreign jihadi families, were children anyway, under 12. So we're talking a few women. Some of them rejoined the Islamic State. That's what is being said. Others went for Turkey, where there is an accord which sends them straight back to France. This is what they wanted, if you're talking about the French women.
James, thank you very much for that, James Andre there. And that's where we leave it. Thank you very much for watching.